This is a District of Sechelt Special Council meeting of Wednesday, June 24th. It is 3:01 p.m. We have an amended agenda that's been provided to us, and I believe it's been posted online. A couple of items I just want to mention to council. Dr. Jeff McKee will be joining us for item 9.1. If he does not finish his other meeting and get here before then, we may end up moving that down so that he can join us for that discussion. On the amended agenda, we should also see, so we should have 9.1. That's the overdose prevention services on the Sunshine Coast. 9.2, a BC Ferries schedule update from Councillor McLean. And then there are two items inserted under 10.1. So we should all have those items. Everybody has that. I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
And
so, yes.
Before we get too far, I want to declare a conflict.
Okay. For which item?
Item 3.1 and 10.1. I live very close to the poly development, so I'll be stepping out for those discussions.
Thank you. So, do you want to leave now? Because our next item is item 3.1. Which is Mr. Polly. Thank you. And I think Jen, you can, okay, she's moved him out into the waiting room. So Mr. Polly, the floor is going to be yours. I'm going to tell you we have 10 minutes for your presentation. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hello?
We can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay. Dear Mayor and Council and staff, thank you for taking the time and resources to review the development variance permit for my 3-lot subdivision application. I hope it meets with your approval. I have owned this property for 40 years for the sole purpose of subdividing the land, owning one of the homes on this 1.45 acre waterfront property, which is R1 zoned. The DOS staff, professionals, and I have been involved in subdividing this property close to 7 years. During that time, I've complied and provided everything the DOS staff have asked of me. There has been many changes both to the subdivision and to the staffing of the district. This has led to the property initially being granted a 7-lot subdivision, which has now evolved into a 3-lot subdivision with common area under the direction of the approving officer and if approved by council today. These last years have been a burden of cost, both financially and personally, but I keep going because it was my dream and goal to have a home on this property in this community and for my family. About 2 years ago, my son was on the property and I told him I may have to sell it because I'm running out of money, and he encouraged me to keep going as he said he would love to live here. The development variance permit has been addressed by a letter regarding the floodplains exemption setback and Marineway upgrade. Regarding the Marineway upgrade, I wish to add that our position is supported by the District of Sechelt revised TLR dated March 2011, whereby only pavement resurfacing and repairs were required. I can show this on screen if you'd like. Under item 2 of the development variance permit, staff supports the exemption of underground and electrical and telecommunication cables along Greenway frontage of the subject land. This same request for exemption was approved by council in September 2015's development variance permit. It was shown that 2 new poles would be required in front of the neighboring properties to accommodate this action, with a net result of 1 less pole and large expense. Furthermore, all services are already underground along this area of Marine Way. BC Hydro was not in favor of this construction and maintains that position today. The items within the DVP have been directed by the approving officer, including the site layout and common area to accommodate an 8-meter dedicated beach access, and the December 28th development permit granted by you, the council, for a 3 waterfront lot development on my property. I ask that council approves these changes cited within the development permit so that development variance permit so that I can finally move forward with my development and my life. Thank you. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions by council? Councillor Toth.
I noticed that the property is currently listed for sale. I was just wondering if you could speak to that.
I'm running out of money. So it's either I'm trying to, I have owned this property for 40 years. I'm trying to save it, preserve it. I mean, if I lose the property, I've lost 40 years worth of value, but also for my, as I say, my goal, my dream, and also I wanted to have something to leave to my family. I have a very strong attachment to this property. But on the reality of it, through the 7 years, I am also in debt. So I'm hoping to get the positive decision from council so I can move forward with the development itself. Reality, it's a lot easier selling 3 lots or 2 lots or 1 lot than it is a large piece of property.
So I guess to further to Councillor Toth's question, what I'm hearing you say then is if you do get the variance, you don't intend to sell the whole piece of property as it's currently listed. Is that right?
No, I'll take it off the market. And what I'm hoping to do is sell 1 lot, recap some of the costs to lower my indebtedness, and then I'll build a home on the 2nd lot, a spec home. And then once that's sold, then I'll be able to build my home, afford to build my home. I've incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt right now.
All right. Any other questions by council? Councillor Lamb?
Well, you know, I went for a walk on, I went for a walk on the property yesterday, just sort of around, I shouldn't say on it, but I walked along Marine Way and then I saw where the driveway goes down. And, you know, it's a little bit of a tough piece of property, but, you know, it seems to me like it's not tougher than any place else and anybody's built on. The setback from the water, the 15-meter setback, is that a problem for you or not?
Well, as the property itself is varied. If you walk along Marine Way, it's steep and it drops down a lot. Part of that area of the drop is municipal property and tied to my property. The walkway, the road that goes down, you see it flattening out. When the district asked about the slope issues, the staff, my engineer presented them with 3 lots with the slope. The greatest grade we had to deal with is 14%. If you look at the topographical that was submitted with the letter, that shows that as the property comes down, it tapers, but it starts to flatten out more as you go towards the water. It's a softer grade. So by having, when we first requested, initially requested a 5-meter from top of bank, which was supported both by professional and previous council, sorry, not previous council, previous staff. If you look at that area from the 5 meters from top of bank, you're dealing with a very level slope, a lot nicer slope. So as a builder, it's more convenient or easier to build on that, but it's also nicer for the family. With regards to lot 3, the request of lot 3, because it's such an odd shape and because there's an insistence by your approving officer to have 8 meters dedicated, I have to be a certain meters away from that dedication. So it makes it tighter within that area to build a house. Can I build a minimum size house? Yes. But you're dealing with a half-acre lot as well. The other I'd like to make note of also is with regards to the request for the setback, is that if you look on the property on the beach, I'm 5 lots away from Mackenzie Marina. It's a commercial marina. I'm not in a sensitive environmental area. My neighbors have grass gazebos, docks, right down to the beach. It's an open area. I'm the last one in this whole area, in that area that's subdivided.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, did that answer your question?
Yeah, yep, I'm comfortable. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of our delegation? All right. So thank you, Mr. Pauly. As you know, this item will be coming back up on our agenda. So I think we're going to be moving you out to the to be an attendee, and we'll see what happens later. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And we should invite Councillor McLean back into our meeting. Welcome back, Councillor McLean. So we do not have Jeff McKee here with us yet. So I'd like to move to item 9.2, which is the BC Ferry schedule update from Councillor McLean. So over to you.
There's my mute button. Okay. So yesterday, as part of the Ferry Advisory Committee, we met with a few members from BC Ferries. The current schedule is not meeting expectations, and that traffic is returning a lot faster than BC Ferries predicted. So at that meeting, they announced that midday sailings are going to be resumed from Thursday to Monday for the next 2 weeks. Beyond that is to be determined, but my indication is fairly positive for the midday sailings for those weekendish sailings. And then finally from the meeting, BC Ferries has committed to monitoring the traffic levels and adjusting the service as needed. They're going to be meeting again with the Ferry Advisory Committee next week to discuss this new schedule with the 2-hour 10 round trip. And they have committed to an ongoing dialogue with the community as they figure out this new normal under COVID. And one thing they did add to that is it's in BC Ferry's best interest to transport as much traffic as they can, because most of their revenue does come from ferry traffic. So the more people they can transport, the more money they get. So that's my kind of half update from the BC Ferries meeting. I want to add a couple points from some work that I've done and some follow-up from what BC Ferries presented. On-time performance over the last month was 38%. Last year in June, it was 72%. So it's a huge decrease from what it was previously. BC Ferries announced that they want to go to a 2-hour 10 round trip. If we look at the schedule last summer, the round trip was anywhere in between 2-hour and 15 and 2-hour and 20 minutes. So even though they are extending it, it's still not at the same level that it was last year. So I believe that it's not sufficient, and they're going to continue to run late sailings. And the reason they gave for that reduction is that the shorter their round trip time is, the less they have to pay staff, the less time. So shorter work days, which saves them a little bit of money because they are in money saving mode right now. I've also been collecting stats on traffic. So in June, vehicle traffic is down about 25% from June 2019. And every week traffic is increasing. So we're seeing more and more people traveling. And just today, the province announced that stage 3 of the pandemic is kind of entering, and interprovincial travel is going to start. So I expect travel to increase to the coast, and ferry service is going to get significantly behind due to the tourist load, which is going to hurt our day-to-day travel for locals. So if we look at that schedule for the first week of July that they just updated on the website, we get a total of 106 sailings per week. Last year, for this time period, we had 145 sailings per week. So that's a reduction of 27%. So we're getting significantly less sailings than we did last year, while traffic is rising every week. So I believe that we need to ask BC Ferries for immediate resumption of their 2019 schedule that will include more sailings during peak times and more time in between each sailing to allow them to stay more in time. So I'll welcome any questions that you guys may have from that.
Any questions from any councilors? Councilor McLean, I know I typed up that email and tried to send it and it didn't go, and now I can't find it, so I'll have to ring it. Any questions of Councilor McLean? Councilor Rowe.
Just a comment, well, to start, to thank Matt for all the advocacy work that you're doing towards BC Ferries. Is there any indication of the Transport Canada allowing people to stay in their cars? Is that going to continue?
I haven't heard anything in regards to that.
Okay.
Just from my perspective, I would say that's best practices, but we haven't heard anything from Transport Canada about changes there.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilor Lamb, you're unmuted. Did you want to speak?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay. All right. One of the I've been on a couple of the meetings as well with Councilor McLean around this issue, and I think between us we've sort of looked at what we'd like to do as a council to advocate. This is something that the other governments are also looking at. BC Ferries has been pretty responsive. They've been working with us. They've been having regular meetings. In fact, they've indicated that they've really appreciated the feedback because they can see the stats, but they also then hear about some of the issues that have been encountered by residents who are trying to get back and forth, and they recognize the impact on business and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't think a letter coming from us would be something that they wouldn't expect. So do you want me to just kind of go through what we kind of came up with?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so what we'd like to do is recommend that council send a letter to BC Ferries. First of all, thanking them for their responsiveness by reinstating the midday sailing and increasing the time between sailings to start to address the on-time sailings. And then we would like to request that they reinstate the summer 2019 schedule for the Sunshine Coast. That would address the sailings that Councillor McLean is talking about. And then finally, that they continue to engage as they have been to date through the summer of 2019, so that we can ongoingly address issues as they arise. So that's sort of the motion we'd like to put forward. Any comments about that first before I ask for somebody second? Councillor Todd.
I understand BC Ferries was having some staffing capacity problems. I've got a family friend who works on the ferries, and they were expressing some concerns with their workday, both the length and the shift schedule that they were being provided, because they had a lot of people who were out, either concerns around COVID or overabundance of caution because they were showing symptoms, things like that. But I understand they had a fairly substantial workforce reduction. Do they have any, has that improved?
Councillor McLean, do you know?
I have no indication, but like I said, I have a meeting with BC Ferries next week where I could ask them.
Any other? Councillor Scott?
How is it, Matt? Have you had any looks at the Horseshoe Bay Nanaimo route? Because that 2019 schedule kind of hinges around connecting with that Nanaimo ferry for the added sailings. What's that route capacity like, and is it warranted for them to go back to their old schedule on that route?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have any data for their route in June. The latest I have for that route is in May, and that shows 0 sailings, so it's not too useful.
Yeah, I think that might be one of the hinge points for those added sailings with that connection.
Yeah, if I can, I think this is about setting out a vision for what our community would like to see.
Yeah.
I think we can pass it off to BC Ferries to figure out how to make it happen with staff constraints, with terminal conflict constraints, and meeting up with the Departure Bay Ferry. But what I'd like to see is set out that vision that we want to see the same service level that we had last summer. That is what Seashelt wants. So I think that's the intent of the motion that Mayor Segers and I discussed shortly before this meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Rowe?
I would just say that I agree. I don't think we need to get too lost in the minutia of how BC Ferries is able to achieve it, but I think we need to put the vision out there, as Matt calls it. I would concur.
Okay. Councillor Toth?
What about an invitation to the other local governments to sign on to that? So we're a united front on this?
Okay, we could do that. So a joint letter between all of them, it's possible. Councillor McLean?
So that's somewhat happening already. Gibson's is in a council meeting right now, and it's also on their agenda. So we're not going to be able to communicate with them before they talk about it. But we wanted to get it on ours, Gibson's, and I believe the SCRD will be talking about it tomorrow. So if it's not one letter, it's 3 letters. Hopefully the nation can get on board with very similar intent.
Just
Any
to
other?
clarify, yeah. And just to clarify, we're all asking for the same thing. Is Gibson's, is their vision similar to ours? As in resumption of the 2019 summer schedule? Yeah.
Yes. So earlier this week, was that Monday? We had the Ferry Advisory Committee from the Northern Sunshine Coast, Southern Sunshine Coast, Gambier Island, and all of the governments here had a meeting to kind of come up with what our united ask would be. So we've all agreed that we're looking for the summer 2019 schedule being resumed and these other things as we put forward.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, it's consistent. That was the purpose of the meeting that we had earlier this week.
Pending what council decides in Gibson's.
Yes. Okay. All right, so I'll make the recommendation as put forward and seconded. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. So we'll get that out fairly quickly. So I see that Dr. Jeff McKee has joined us. We rearranged the schedule and took item 9.2 before 9.1. Thank you for being here with us. So before we move into this, I'd like to move receipt of Councillor McLean's report and this correspondence. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. All right, so do you want me to lay out what's happened over the last few days? Okay. So on Sunday, I received an email indicating that on Saturday, a pop-up overdose prevention site had been set up in Seashelt. And that going forward, it was going to continue to be set up in Seashelt to provide services to residents of the community and of the Sunshine Coast. So on a previous meeting that I was in today, one of the members there indicated, I mean, we all know that there was an overdose death in Seashelt a couple of weeks ago. There have been a couple of more since. So I've heard that there's been at least 3. There may have been more. All I know of is 3. And the peer community are really concerned. The drugs that are out in our community right now are heavily laced with fentanyl, and overdoses are happening on a regular basis. And they're concerned about dealing with that. So they want to have this tent set up. When they set it up, they actually put it on private property, and the landowner is not willing to have them be there. So we had a conversation, the government leaders had a conversation earlier this week and looked at what we could do around this. And we've had a couple of meetings with the community action team as well since then. And the ideal situation would be if there was some place where a temporary site could be set up now, and letting the Vancouver Coastal Health and Dr. Jeff McKee and others look at finding a more permanent solution in the community. So the letter that Dr. Jeff McKee wrote to us is on our agenda here. I think we've all read it. And I'll turn it over to you, Dr. McKee. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you, Mayor Seekers, and thank you for the invitation to be here today to speak to the letter. I think you've laid out kind of the situation on what brought this to the forefront, I think, this week, and also acknowledging that I think we hear of deaths, we hear of overdoses that are occurring, and I think it's important to know also that these may occur in certain places, but the risk is throughout the province right now. We know that the drug supply is heavily contaminated with fentanyl. We know we've seen a lot of deaths throughout the province. Last year, we saw a bit of an improvement. Unfortunately, this year, as was noted in the most recent BC Coroner's report, provincially, we've seen an uptick again this year. So I think we all know that the risk is there and that we need to look to tools and different ways to help respond to this to make sure that we are working towards different ways to help reduce the risk of overdose and overdose deaths. So in the letter, at the request of Mayor Seekers and others, I wanted to outline kind of the general approach that VCH takes to allow the operation of overdose prevention sites under the public health emergency that was declared several years ago. And this process has kind of underlied a lot of the operation of overdose prevention sites that we've seen elsewhere, both those in Vancouver. I should note that there's a difference between supervised consumption sites that have been applied for under the federal program, like Insight. Those have been in existence for a long time, but more of these more recent sites that have been really in response to the overdose emergency, that is through this public health emergency, which is what I outlined here. And also other ones, this is similar process, for example, was done in Powell River. That was through a collaboration of the community action team there. And that led to the implementation of the overdose prevention site in Powell River. So I wanted to kind of lay out this process to help guide some of the conversation here on what our approach has been through VCH, providing designations for the operation of the sites, but also some of the supports. And also to note that while we've identified overdose prevention sites as a very important tool in helping reduce the risk of overdoses, there's not a one size fits all. Particularly when we have kind of the geography we do on the coast. You put a service in Sechelt, that doesn't necessarily provide service to everyone all the way up to Pender Harbor or down to Gibsons. So I think we need different tools. And I think in the letter, I've also identified some of those other tools that are out there, and also recently released was the Lifeguard app, which has been released provincially and can help address some of those needs when we don't have a site kind of available when at the moment it's needed. So I think that'll work for some people, it won't work for other people. So we know that overdose prevention sites save lives. And so I look forward to kind of this conversation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have regarding the letter that I submitted.
Okay, and before I go to questions from councillors, let you know that this letter, it says, dear local government representatives. Yes, so it is actually on the agenda for the town of Gibsons today. It's on the agenda at the Sechelt Nation today. The regional district will be discussed tomorrow. It's going to be on the agenda there. So it's coming to all the governments on the Sunshine Coast this week, given the urgency of the situation. So Councillor McLean.
Yeah, thank you. Since this is the last minute report, I haven't done a lot of research into this field, so I'm going to ask a pretty basic question. What kind of services are offered at an overdose prevention site? And maybe if there's a difference, what's being offered in Powell River versus what may be offered at this pop-up one so far?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really good question. And, you know, we use the term overdose prevention services because it can represent a number of different services here. I think when we're looking at the exemption under the public health emergency, it's often the supervised consumption component, which kind of gives some protections to allow for consumption of illicit substances, knowing that this is being done in an environment that'll prevent harm, that in a way it's providing that service to make sure that we're saving lives. So that's a key component of overdose prevention services, but there's other types of prevention services as well. There can be different peer witnessing programs similar to supervised consumption. Harm reduction supplies, there can be provision of supplies at these sites. At sites like Powell River, it also acts as a connection point for other healthcare and social services in the community. So for example, at that site, they'll have linkages to mental health teams, etc. So often that is the first touch point in which someone enters the system and then has that connection. If they're at the point in their journey where they're ready to go into treatment, that may be a place. And I've heard anecdotal stories of folks taking that path after engaging with an overdose prevention site. Now, that being said, not all of these services look the same way in every overdose prevention site that's operated. So a pop-up may not have, I mean, especially in a temporary scenario, it may not have the same kind of structure as we might have in a more formalized approach. So I think it's varied. There's different models of overdose prevention services. In a pop-up, it might have specific types of services at that point that can be provided. But I think when we look to those more official kind of sanctioned models, we're looking to bring all those resources together to really have a kind of a holistic approach to supporting folks wherever they are on that journey towards recovery or towards better health.
Okay, other questions? Councillor Toth.
Yeah, I just wanted, it's not a question so much as a comment. I just wanted to highlight that Lifeguard app. If you're a drug user anywhere, you should have this app installed. I just went and checked it out on my phone, and it's extremely easy to use. It's super simple to use. Council knows I lost my brother to an overdose 3 years ago. And if this app had been around, I'm pretty certain he'd still be alive. So I just wanted to emphasize that app and its availability. And thank you for being here today.
Councillor Rowe.
So Jeff, are you looking for support from us? Is there a decision around this letter that's being looked for today?
Thanks for the question. The letter was really at a request to inform the conversation here. I think it was to provide some context for how these work, how the process is for operationalizing an OPS. As noted in there, I think I really look forward to further discussion through the community action team as well, because I think that's an excellent platform for the collaboration we need to really get these successful initiatives going. I will note that I think the community action team was an essential component, an essential platform for the success that Powell River saw in operationalizing this. But really this letter was more to provide that information to kind of inform discussions going forward. And I don't know, Mayor Seegers, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you. This is not a conversation that we've had at this table. It's not a conversation that's been had at any of the government tables up and down the coast. And given the situation we're dealing with, the peer community has actually put up this pop-up overdose prevention site and have indicated that they will continue to do this until a sanctioned site is in place. So we had a meeting this morning, actually, a group of us of the CAP team, but looking at, I forget what it's called, something about the team. It was the OPS working group. That's what it's called, of the CAP team. And basically what came out of that meeting was that this site is going to happen. And if we want to have any say in where it goes in our community, it would be up to us to identify a spot that we could support, knowing that it would be temporary at this point, and that the CAP team is working towards a more long-term sustainable solution.
Okay. So would it be safe to say that this would be a site that was sanctioned by VCH then? Or is there VCH involvement in this potential site?
Jeff, maybe you can answer that in one
Yeah,
way or
I can
another.
touch on this. So VCH has, I mean, there's a continuum of how these sites have operated. Right now, we don't have a designation out right now for this site. Other sites, similar sites have operated in other jurisdictions. There's one at Oppenheimer Park as well in Vancouver. That doesn't mean VCH doesn't get involved. If we have a site that's operating, we want to make sure that if they are going to operate, they're operating with training and with the right supplies. So there can be engagement through that. In order to get the specific designation, we do look for an operational plan and some other pieces before we provide a designation. I think I outlined some of those pieces within the letter there. But then in other cases, VCH has had other types of involvement in the operation of some of these OPSs. So it's a bit of a continuum here. I think when we're looking at a temporary solution, we'd have to look at further discussion on what that would look like. But I think there's different steps in the development of kind of, I think we'd all like to go to, if we are going to have overdose prevention services in the community, a sustainable model where we can really have something that's well integrated and well connected to all the different stakeholders.
Okay. I just have to be a bit cautious with my conflict of interest and decision making, etc. Topic that is near and dear to my heart. Do you have any stats on the numbers that they've seen in Powell River, the success that they've had that you could share? Or
sorry, is that for the number of visitors they might have had at the site, or overdoses reversed?
Anything, just to provide some context.
I don't have the numbers on me at the moment. We're not talking the same volumes that have been seen, for example, in Vancouver at the overdose prevention sites, right, where they might see hundreds there. You might see a handful in a rural community a day. So it's often low numbers. That being said, there has been they've been successful in the way in the service they have provided to those individuals. So we do know that those services have saved lives. So those are kind of the general numbers I can give you without having them right at hand right now. But I think in all kind of consideration of how things have gone in Powell River, it's been seen as quite successful. Given that we went into it without a lot to go on in a way for rural models. Most of the evidence and most of the ways in which we've seen these operated have been in urban centers. So I think there's been a lot of learnings in the rural setting, but it's felt really good seeing something operate as well as it did and be as successful as it was in Powell River.
Okay, thank you. That's all I've got.
Okay, if we look at, like, we're talking temporary, and I sent him a few questions ahead of time because I knew there were some things that were going to come up, and if you guys didn't bring them up, I was going to bring them up. One was around temporary site. If we say, okay, we will designate this place and say they can have a temporary site here, given what's going on with the CAT, which you're part of, I'm part of, what would temporary look like? Would it be like a few weeks? Would it be a few months? Would it be a year? Like, what kind of time frame are we kind of looking at there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And unfortunately, I think there would be a lot of unknowns still, because I think temporary in the context of what we're speaking of right now is until we get something more formalized. And so I think it would be a matter of getting through those discussions and to see where that might where we might find a more formalized overdose prevention site that can be sustainable in the long term. So I unfortunately can't put whether that's going to be days or months, because I think it's going to depend a lot on the collaboration that we have through the CAT, which is, as I mentioned, a really good platform for these discussions, I think. But it's also noting as well, and I think it's important that I think it was included in the letter, is that even when we do have these overdose prevention sites under the public health emergency, while we think that these services should be always available, they are designated under the temporary emergency as well. So these are not yet gone through the federal process to create a long-term model like Insight. These are for the extent of the public health emergency right now. That being said, I mean, as I said, from a public health point of view, I think these overdose prevention services are core services, but the designation is temporary under the public health emergency.
Okay. And then what about having it at the hospital? You know, having it on the parking lot or something at the hospital. There is room there. What would that look like?
Yeah, another good point. And hospital sites have been considered in other jurisdictions for overdose prevention sites. Although I will say that in the discussion we've had when that has come up as a possibility, they haven't been optimal. In particular, actually, with the peer community, because I think they're overly medicalized. Hospitals aren't always the a key place that folks want to visit. So they're not great locations. For further discussion around whether or not this site would be optimal, I think we'd need to engage hospital leadership and have some further discussions.
Okay. And then what type of services would be needed at a site? I mean, the one that they just set it up Saturday, they set it up Monday, basically an empty lot and a tent.
Yeah, and I think there's different models, I think, of overdose prevention sites. And so I think you'll find some are better resourced than others and may have better infrastructure. So there's going to be quite a continuum of this. Now, that being said, I think we would optimally, there would be some services, whether they have water or access to washrooms, et cetera, to maintain good hygiene and sanitation on the sites. But there's I mean, we've seen outdoor tents used for overdose prevention sites in some cases. Again, not optimal, but we often, particularly peer advocates, will work with what they have. And so we'd look to see how we can ensure hygiene and sanitation in those contexts. And so if we were looking for designation, particularly under the Public Health Act as an OPS site, we'd be looking for an operational plan to have some of those conversations on what how we can make sure that the services that are necessary are there.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you. So at this point, I don't feel prepared to make a decision. I don't have enough information about what the service is, what criteria they need for a site. So I'd like to see this referred to staff so they can explore implications of setting up a temporary site. And one major thing that I'm concerned with is the training. And I think if we don't do it properly, it could carry a whole lot of risk. And I have absolutely no idea what kind of implications there are. So I think it needs a whole lot more work before I'm comfortable making a decision, either for or against.
Okay, Councillor Todd.
I'm inclined to agree. I don't think we have enough information yet. I just wanted to highlight the one model that I had seen in another community is they had renovated a motorhome, a fairly high-end motorhome unit into an OPS unit that can be moved. And so it would spend, this was in Kelowna, and it would spend 2 or 3 evenings a week downtown, and it would spend 2 or 3 evenings a week up in Rutland, which had a problem area as well. So I don't know that we necessarily need to look at a fixed location if resources are available to outfit some sort of a mobile unit that can be mobilized, because we've got, Seashell, Gibsons, maybe something's needed up in Madeira Park from time to time. And so I think we should not limit ourselves to land-based options.
Okay, any other comments or questions? I have to let you know that my understanding is this is going to be set up in Seashell. It will be set up in Seashell, whether we designate a spot or not. So we will be dealing with that. If we want to have some say in it, it's up to us to do that. Because we didn't ask for it to be set up last week. We didn't ask for it to be set up this past Monday night. It will be set up this week. And my understanding is probably starting tomorrow night. Councillor Todd.
What's the legality and, for that matter, the liability of an unsanctioned site like this one that's been showing up?
I can talk about the private property piece. The property owner does not want it on his property. And so the RCMP did attend it and request that it be removed or be moved off. That happened at the end of the day on Saturday, and they were pretty much shutting down anyway. And then there was an agreement that they shut down at 6 o'clock Monday night. And so they did. They don't have, at this point, the RCMP doesn't know, they don't want to, arrest everybody, but there are issues around private property for putting something like this up. So it could escalate. And we would then need to deal with that in the community as well. Dr. McKee, did you want to say anything else to that?
No, I think, I mean, when we look at the legality part, I'll just first off say that, I mean, I think I defer to our law enforcement colleagues for many of the legal aspects here. But I will say that part of the designation is allowing under the public health order the possession and use of substances on that property, or that at that site, I should say. So I think that's where the legal part of the designation comes in. For the other pieces, I'd have to defer to law enforcement.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Would anybody like to make a recommendation? Councillor Toth.
Well, it wasn't so, well, I'm not going to make any recommendations
Okay.
just yet because I'm not totally sure how I feel about this, but I think
Yeah.
that looking longer term, we need to make sure that our community is a part of this consultation wise. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of fear. There's going to be a lot of NIMBYism about it. But I think the community associations at a minimum need to have some input, recognizing it's likely to be downtown or adjacent to downtown. So whether that's just the SDBA and the Downtown Sechelt Residents Association in whatever form it exists, or whether that's all of the community associations. Maybe Wilson Creek Selma Park Community Association has a great idea, and we don't know it unless we hear from them.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor Scott?
I think the challenge that we're going to have is where they're going to set it up this next go around. So without a recommendation from us today, and they decide to set it up on district property, are we condoning it?
I don't know if it's that question. The other question of that on that is, if they do set it up on district property, and maybe you can address this, Dr. McKee, if they set it up on district property, what do we have at our at our disposal to do about it, if anything?
Yeah, so I mean, in these cases, VCH wouldn't necessarily have a role in enforcement of an unsanctioned site. I think as I mentioned, there's been a continuum of these types of sites, and in some cases, there's been unsanctioned sites that have operated. We wouldn't necessarily encourage. We want to support overdose prevention services because we do know that they do save lives. But we also want to do that in a way that's sustainable and successful and is effective. And I think, as I mentioned, we'd be looking forward to the community action team developing that long-term approach. In the meantime, as I mentioned, VCH, if these services were going to be operating unsanctioned, we'd still be connecting to ensure that they had the appropriate training, harm reduction supplies on site, et cetera. And I'd definitely be available for further consultation on kind of that case-by-case basis on those next steps.
The only public property that we have basically are our parks. We have, Ebb Tide's one of those. Friendship Park, Hackett Park, downtown, Snicket. We've got the Rockwood and the parking lots up there. I think that's about it. Councillor McLean, oh, you're coming back in, okay. So what would you like to do? Councillor McLean.
Sorry, I'm just back. My internet died.
Yeah, that's okay. So I basically said if the District of Sechelt land is the parks and Rockwood. That's pretty much what we have in downtown Sechelt. How would you like to proceed with this? Councillor Lamb.
I've just got a question here. So who runs these facilities when they set them up? Is it part of the establishment? Like, is it run by the government, or is it run by, who's it run by, and who gives them the product they need to open the door?
Jeff, over to you.
Sure. As I mentioned, there's a lot of different models here. Right now, we're talking about a peer-run site. So people with lived experience kind of providing services to make sure that they're witnessing others using so that they can intervene in overdose. Again, I haven't seen a full operational plan and everything in this case, so I can't speak to the details. There's different models out there though. And some often, as I mentioned in the letter there as well, that when we're looking for a designation, we're often looking for a nonprofit or a non-governmental organization to kind of take the lead in administering the site, running it, finding the location, and ensuring that there's a model where staff are trained, or often they're engaging peers as well who can be trained. And we often leverage our trained staff in Vancouver who have a lot of experience running these sites in helping with some of that training. To make sure that they're prepared in the case of an overdose, that they also work with them to make sure the supplies are on hand to respond to any overdose and to make sure that that things are running appropriately. I'll also point you to I include a link in the letter as well. That's to our policy and procedure manual for the operation of overdose prevention sites. And that has some additional information. It's quite long though, so I'm not, I don't expect everybody to read it, but it has some more of that information on what we look for in running these sites.
Hey, Councillor Lamb, anything else?
No, it's just right outside my realm. I don't, I just really don't understand the whole program. But, I'm fine. Yeah. But so are there, I mean, are there professional people that come up and train people? I mean, is there somebody working, or is there somebody being paid in this program, or is it all volunteers that set these things up? Is it like, if you're a peer, then I would.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. Just an answer to that, and again, I apologize that there's not one model here. In this case, we're talking about currently. I mean, it's volunteer peers who are running this site we're talking about right now. In other cases, there are definitely paid staff and trained staff who run these programs. For example, in the Powell River one, it's paid and trained staff and peers who run the overdose prevention site. And some other ones have nurses as well. So there's different models of these. I think if we were looking forward, we'd be looking at closer to one of those more established type models. I think we'd have to look to see what this temporary model might look like. And as I said, we can also leverage our own staff to support training to make sure that that people are trained in how to respond to an overdose, know how to use naloxone, etc.
Is it Councillor McLean and then Councillor Rowe?
Yeah, maybe the Mayor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially it's several good intentioned people who have set up a tent and are willing to supervise consumption. Is that a very basic understanding of what's happening now?
Several well-intentioned people who are setting up a tent. They're not willing to, they are setting up a tent.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and that's essentially it.
Yes.
At this point.
Okay. At this point, that's right.
Thank you. That piece was missing for me. So.
Okay, Councillor Rowe.
And I was going to just say exactly what Matt did, but to expand on that, they are setting it up wherever they see fit, and you are reaching out to us to measure the appetite for identifying a place for them to set up that would be on district property, so that they're not setting up on private property.
Yes. Because either way, we'll be dealing with it.
Yes, and I hear what you're saying.
I know this.
Just don't know.
I know.
On this afternoon.
No, I get it. This has been a conversation that literally started Monday morning.
Yeah.
So this has been rapidly evolving. This is not even Monday. We didn't anticipate that we would be at the position we're at now. And I mean, I don't know how many meetings we've been in since Monday morning, probably 4 or 5 as it's been rolling out. So what became clear this morning at the 9 o'clock meeting that we had was that this will be going ahead whether we choose a location or not. And so if we, do we need to do that now? No, we don't need to do that now. I mean, I agree with Councillor McLean. This is part of why this is on our agenda here is this is a conversation that is happening in the community. Through the CAT team, we were advocating for more community involvement, more conversation around this, so that if we got to this point, or when we got to this point, there would be more awareness in the community, and these conversations had happened out there. That hasn't happened.
Mhm.
Part of that, we started actually the beginning of this year, we actually had a plan in place to do those community engagements, to start doing that education and everything else. We actually even had dates and things set up, and then COVID hit. And that is just like all of those got canceled. And the COVID piece has actually made it worse for the people who use drugs.
Yeah.
So all of it has kind of come to this point where the work that should have been done in the community, the engagement, the communication hasn't happened through no fault of anybody, right? It hasn't happened. And now we have a situation where, in response to the deaths that are happening and the overdoses that are happening in our community to save lives, a community member has started setting up a tent and will continue to set up a tent in Seashelt. Councillor Todd, Councillor Rowe, finish up what you're.
I was just curious whether there's been discussions with staff, if they have any input into.
Nope. It came from 9 o'clock this morning. I had a conversation with Andrew Yates at about 2:30 this afternoon saying, this is what's coming. That's it. That's the conversation we've had with staff.
I will just say that, I totally understand what you're saying. It doesn't mean that I'm any readier to make a recommendation at this point, though, without some input and some thought. I'm so conflicted because let me tell you, you only have to be in the emergency room when one of these overdoses come in and you see it in action and the trauma that it causes, not just to the family, etc., but to everybody involved, that you want to do whatever you can to not have that experience. Mm-hmm. But that still doesn't mean that I'm ready right this second to say, okay, let's put it there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Councillor McLean. No? Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I'm not willing to support this in any one of our parks. Maybe that's petty of me, I don't know, but there it is. One batch of properties though that we haven't given consideration to is Block 7. We've got Municipal Hall, the lawns, the areas around it. We've got the parking lot at the rec center, which is currently closed. We've got the plaza in front of the Seaside Center with the visitor center currently closed. Flat space, close to emergency services, close to the highway if it's needed for emergency vehicles, close to the police if we've got any problems. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay. Councillor Kuster.
I was just actually going to say the same thing. I wouldn't support it putting in one of our parks either. It's just not a place where I think people go there with families, young kids, and I don't think I can support that. And I don't even know if I think I can make a decision today as well. There's just too many things to think about with respect to this. So that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. Councillor Scott, Councillor Lamb.
Jeff, did you have a site that you had thought might work?
Sorry, was that were you asking that to me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think it's often when we're looking at, when we've chosen sites in other places, we've looked at where the service will most likely be used. So we often look to see where a lot of overdoses are occurring. We also, in the past, have worked with local government to find places. We found lots in the past in other places. We had a public lot in Powell River that had been found that was actually right in the core space where we were seeing overdoses. So that's how we chose those sites. I can't speak to that specifically in Sechelt. I think if we are looking at a formal site, we'd want to do a similar analysis in addition to all the other consultation, all the other discussion that would be necessary. But at this point, I think I don't have any specifics to offer in Sechelt.
Thank you.
Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, I think a big thing here is access, and it's access for the users. You know, if you put it up in the parking lot behind Rockwood, who's ever going to find it up there? You know, you'd have to have arrows or a big light up there or something. Where Block 7 or at St. Mary's Hospital, something like that makes a lot of sense. So, that's my comments.
Okay, what I'm hearing is that while we're potentially in favor of having a site somewhere, we would like staff to put together some information about potential sites, and we'll just deal with what happens between now and when that comes back to us as it unfolds. So, Councillor McLean, would you like to make a motion similar to what you made before? No? You can, I mean, you can. I think you recommended that it be referred to staff.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just scrambling because I'm outside now without my notes.
Okay. Councillor Kuster, did you want to do something? Or Councillor Rowe?
I have minutes reflected currently. The resolution was that this item be referred to staff to figure out implications of setting up a temporary overdose prevention site.
Okay, do we want the implications, or do we also want them to identify potential sites?
I would say we'd want to identify some potential sites if they thought any were suitable.
Okay. So would anybody like to make that recommendation? Councillor Lamb, what do you have to say? Councillor Toth, Councillor Lamb?
I've just got a question, one more question for you.
Okay.
If we put this in Sechelt, does it seem to attract, you know, people from other communities to come to Sechelt? Like, you know, would people come from Vancouver to Sechelt because we've got an overdose prevention thing set up? Or I'm just, you know, like, once again, it's something I really struggle with. I don't understand it, and you know, it's so I'm just, you know, I mean, there seems to be so many, life is changing so fast, and there's so many new, you know, new normals.
Well, if you've got the question, you can bet that other people in the community have the same question.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm just, you know, it's just, yeah, I just, I don't know, you know, do we want Gibson's to set it up?
Well, Gibson's is looking at that as well, right? And it might be that they will have a site as well in Gibson's. Right. Dr. McKee, did you want to address his question about attracting people?
Yeah, I can speak to kind of experience in other places. I mean, if we're talking about people from Vancouver coming here, I mean, I can't predict what will happen, but I can say that there's a lot of services in Vancouver, so I don't foresee a service kind of attracting people here. That being said, we've also seen often these services. We know drug use is already happening in the community, and more often than not, it's allowing it to be done in a less risky environment. So we also see some beneficial effects from that as well. So I can't speak to it as attracting people to the area. Often it's more used by the people who live near it and who are around it. And again, from our experience in other rural communities, we're still only talking usually about a handful of people a day that we'd be seeing. And often they're repeat people who use the services as well. So.
Councillor Rowe?
Sorry, Jeff, are people really overdosing, or are they using laced drugs? In other words, is there any conversation about changing the verbiage to, something like being poisoned as opposed to overdosing?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, there's been lots of discussion on what to call the use of fentanyl or the addition of fentanyl into the black market. Well, it's difficult to always know what's going on and why it's being used. There's a mix out there. In some cases, it is a contaminant. In some cases, intentionally added and not necessarily known by the user. In other cases, fentanyl is also out there with people knowingly using it. So it's a mix out there. I think I haven't heard too many changes around overdosing per se, but particularly if you are using something and you're not knowing you're using it, I think poisoning is an accurate term as well. So what we do know is that the drug market out there is dangerous, and it does have a lot of risk for overdoses and deaths. And I think that just underlies the importance of offering a range of services to help reduce that risk.
I think that knowing that helps conversation with people who just don't understand. Well, just don't do it then. And the importance, or even the reason why you would want someone to sit there and watch you shoot up is really supervision in case the drugs aren't safe. My other question was, what is the actual location in Powell River? What sort of setting is it in? Is it in a park? Is it on a vacant lot? Is it on their district land? Do you know?
Yeah, for last year, it was on in an ATCO trailer on district property they had there, and it was in part. I mean, there's various reasons what led to that development, but that was kind of what was settled on at that point, and it worked fairly well. I mean, there's always going to be challenges with the location as well. I think when you talk about access to various people. And some of the questions that come up around different locations, but it worked fairly well. COVID kind of threw a bit of a wrench into a lot of the operation of our OPS services, but as has been kind of as we've worked through it, there's been various guidance as well there how to offer these types of services in a less risky manner that adheres to infection control precautions as well.
Okay.
All right, we don't really have a recommendation on the floor. Jennifer had captured some of the conversation. Councillor Toth.
Can I have Jennifer reread that? And then I'm willing to make a motion based off that.
That this item be referred to staff to identify implications of setting up a temporary overdose prevention site and to consider potential sites.
What she said, except I'd like to add on excluding District of Sechelt designated parks.
Okay, so there's a recommendation on the floor. Would someone like to second that recommendation? Seconded. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? And were any opposed? I think everybody voted in favor of that. All right. Thank you for being here, Jeff. I really appreciate that. Thank you for, helping facilitate this conversation. As I've indicated in a number of the meetings, this is a conversation that is happening in the community. It is something that we need to address, and it needs to be a broader community conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking part.
Thank you for the invitation. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we'll move on to item 10.1 in our agenda. Make sure, and and he's gone just like that. I say 10. Oh no, there he still is. Okay. Councillor McLean is going to leave. Potential conflict of interest. So we'll have, here we go. All right. So first, the subject is Poly Development Variance Permit Application Lot 105, 5830 Marine Way, Seashelt, Development Variance Permit 2020-03 and Flood Control Requirement Exemption Request. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn it over to Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to share my screen for the presentation here. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, we have a development variance permit application and a request for an exemption to the floodplain setback before us, both in relation to a subdivision application. We have a 3-lot subdivision application that staff have been working with the applicant on. The variances are related to the zoning bylaw as well as the subdivision bylaw. And then separate from that, seeking an exemption for the floodplain setback, the 15 meters from the natural boundary of the ocean. Now that is written into the zoning bylaw, but it has to be dealt with separately. We can't consider that aspect within the development variance permit application. It's a separate request to council. So there is some urgency to considering this development permit application and its associated changes for the subdivision application. Sort of as Mr. Pauly mentioned, he has obviously various financial issues to address. There are some legal considerations here. There's a long history to this property and sort of subdivision applications related to this property. I won't go into too much detail there. We're really just focused on the current application, the 3-lot subdivision, and what needs to happen to facilitate that moving forward. So we're looking at variances related to that. The current application, the current variance application was not referred to the APC. The particular variances are technical in nature and not really suited to review by the APC. And there's sort of the urgency to move this forward for council to consider. Noting too that regardless of what happens with the DVP application and the flood exemption request, where we are in the subdivision process with the current subdivision layout, the common lot and the 3 lots, there's already changes that are going to be required to the existing preliminary layout review letter and the existing development permit, just reflecting the current subdivision plan. And both the development permit and the PLR letter also getting close to their expiry timeline. So as part of all of this, we just need to update each of those documents to extend the timelines and update everything to reflect the current plan. So specific to the variance itself, what are we looking at? In the R1 zone, we're looking at lot width, front parcel line setbacks, side setbacks. And so staff are basically supportive of all of this. I mean, we have kind of supported the applicant in seeking these to look at the challenges of this lot. It's a steep, irregularly shaped lot. So what we're trying to do in the R1 zone setbacks for lot lines is look at how we can facilitate this. The lot width has to be adjusted, looking at reducing that from 18 down to 14, reductions to the front setbacks. Now the front setback matters less because the common lot will sit in front of all of these 3 lots. So these lots won't directly front the road anyway. The common lot serves as access to all 3 parcels. So the front setback is less important. The side setbacks, the existing zoning already allows a 1.5 meter setback on one side. So the applicants could conceivably choose, future property owners can conceivably have that on the outside of the lot anyway. This would just allow them to have 1.5 on both sides. This is sort of a direction that we'd be looking at going under the new zoning bylaw anyway for a lot of residential zones, allowing for 1.5 on both sides. And then an additional setback related to the setback from the public access to water dedication. In terms of the subdivision bylaw, we're looking at the request to not have to underground electrical and telecommunications services along the highway frontage. So by default, this is a standard requirement that every subdivision has to underground the services. The subdivision bylaw does speak to certain areas like industrial areas or other particular areas where that's not required by default. And if somebody's looking at wanting to not have to underground, then it has to be dealt with by a variance. And most of the time, this is a cost issue where an applicant would be seeking not to have this required. And it would be a substantial cost savings if they didn't have to do this work. They're also looking at related to the lot width. There's a provision in the Local Government Act that we have to address the exemption for the minimum parcel frontage. That's also related to the lot width variance. And the applicant's also seeking a reduction to the frontage upgrades that would normally be required as part of the default subdivision servicing in terms of not having a sidewalk or installing curb and gutter. For the floodplain exemption request, there's the default 15-meter setback. The applicant is seeking a reduction of 5 meters, going from 15 meters down to 10 meters for the proposed lot 3. Their rationale being that this reduction is necessary to create a suitable building area on the proposed lot 3. So, I mean, in general, district policies, again, generally don't support reduction to this requirement. There have been situations in the past where small reductions have been authorized by council. And for this particular application, staff do not support the full 5-meter reduction. We don't believe that it's actually necessary to create a suitable building area on the lot. The bylaw, the subdivision bylaw does have a minimum building area requirement. I think it's about 101 square meters that every lot created by subdivision has to have. That would be available to be created without any reduction to the flood control requirement. But in order to help facilitate this application, similar to the lot line adjustments proposed, staff could support a 1 meter reduction to the floodplain setback. So going from 15 meters down to 14 meters for the lot 3. And like I said, where we are at, we're just focused on this current 3-lot application. Granted, there's been a long history here, but we're really just focused on the 3 lots and what can we do to facilitate this moving forward. The property is steep. It is in a regular shape, which poses a lot of different challenges for the development. It's not a nice, flat, rectangular lot. It pinches in the middle. It's quite awkward for providing sort of an easy subdivision development. So where we've come to, again, with the common lot, in previous iterations, we've looked at providing easements for access, securing access over multiple properties for each lot to have for a shared driveway, where we've ended up trying to direct the applicant to this common lot approach. Now, it's not a strata, but each lot would have a share in this common lot. That there's provincial legislation that allows this kind of approach where there's limited or no highway frontage access for each lot, or not functional highway frontage. So the common lot provides secure access for each lot, and it provides an opportunity for parking, but it's not a buildable lot. It's really meant to serve as the access for the shared private driveway with an ability for some off-street parking spots. A big chunk of this common lot would also be taken up by engineered fill that is required as part of the Marineway upgrades to widen the road and stabilize it. So it's really not a functional building lot. Here's just a quick overview of the current subdivision layout. This doesn't represent all of the proposed variances, but it's the current layout in terms of what the subdivision would look like. You have the common lot here with the shared drive that comes in. There's a turnaround. There'd be the potential for off-street parking spaces here. This represents the public access to water dedication of 8 meters. Just as a reminder, the default statutory requirement is 20 meters. And the district, or at least the approving officer, isn't under any obligation to consider anything less than 20 meters. We have attempted to work with the applicant to think about, what do we need in this area? A pedestrian only access is definitely something we would like to see. And we could potentially accept less than 20 meters, and where we ended up was the 8 meters, but we wouldn't accept anything less than that. There's still a need to provide access to water for the public. And then you have the 3 building sites, the lot 1, lot 2, lot 3. And as you can see, I mean, the numbers here kind of representing the buildable site area, well in excess of the 101 square meters required by bylaw. So even for lot 3, even without the 5 meter floodplain reduction, you would still have an ability to meet that basic requirement of the bylaw. So yeah, you'll see in your package, there was 2 responses from the public notification process, as well as the applicant, including a letter from their legal counsel, just speaking to the floodplain exemption and the exemption from the servicing requirements, the sidewalk, curb and gutter requirements. So I'm just going to quickly speak to some of those. I've talked already about how the applicant is seeking a 5 meter reduction in order to create a viable building area. Staff don't support the full 5 meters. We could support a 1 meter reduction. Think that a larger reduction is not necessary and would be out of place with the neighborhood and where we're trying to go. But a 1 meter would facilitate making a better building area on that lot 3. As I mentioned, we support the variance request to not have to underground the services, and recognizing that this is a substantial cost savings to the applicant. In terms of the cost between undergrounding versus the sidewalk, curb and gutter, I mean, there would be at least an order of magnitude difference between that. So in the one's hand, if council supports the variance to not require the undergrounding, that cost savings would allow for the other requirements to be met. And I'll get to that later, but again, what we're trying to do is balance what are the servicing requirements required for a safe development, that meets the bylaw requirements, as well as looking at the incremental approach to additional infrastructure, recognizing that there isn't a sidewalk in the immediate area, so perhaps that is something that could be considered as a reduction to the servicing requirements. The subdivision bylaw does have provisions for smaller lots that are looking at subdivision and looking at the existing road standards in the area, what's there, what are the standards that apply, and considering that there is an ability to support not applying the standard in full if under certain considerations. So the road standard, the urban local road standard that would apply would include sidewalk, curb and gutter by default. But as we mentioned, the current road condition doesn't have those things, not in the immediate vicinity of the property. They are starting to work their way up from Marine Way from the south, from Trail Avenue, but they're not there yet. There is a separate district project working on the road related to retaining walls and bringing curb and gutter closer to the property. It's not there yet. So again, when we're looking at subdivision, we're trying to balance that incremental acquisition of additional infrastructure versus where it might be related to the property, and trying to decide what makes sense. Is it better to secure that construction now? Should we be taking the cash in lieu, or is it enough to say, no, we're not there yet, and for council to make the decision, say, no, we would support a reduction in that service requirement until a later date. In terms of the road widening, this is something that is necessary. So regardless of what council wants to do with the sidewalk, curb and gutter pieces, the road widening is definitely necessary, and that's something that I, as the approving officer, would be looking to require anyway. The widening of the road doesn't have any negative impact on the proposed common lot or affect the amount of lots that could be created. I would say that the curb and gutter is considered part of addressing the stormwater management, and it's something that there's infrastructure that's working its way to the property that would support this. But if council want to consider the variance to remove the sidewalk from the servicing requirements, that would be something to keep in mind. It would serve as an additional cost savings to the applicant, and there would be some rationale given that properties on either side in the immediate area don't have sidewalks yet, and the sidewalk further south along Marine Way is still a ways off from being constructed all the way to the property. So there would be a rationale for council to consider that, hey, it's not there yet, and it's not likely to be there in the immediate future. So that could be something that council could support waiving as part of the variance. I mentioned the 2 responses that the public have provided, both not in support of any of the variances. I think both raise a number of issues, which we'll see in the attached letters. So just to summarize everything, coming to the final recommendations, and I'll end my presentation here. What we're looking at, as I tried to outline in the staff report, staff would support, approving the property line setback variances, the exemption to the frontage requirement that's related to the lot width, supporting the variance to not require undergrounding of services. As I mentioned, staff do not support the 5-meter setback reduction, but would recommend that council could consider a 1-meter setback reduction to the floodplain exemption, and council could also consider removing the sidewalk from the road requirements. And that's all I have.
Okay, so before you put that slide away, are these what is in the recommendations coming forward and in the variants that are before us? I thought it was a little different than what you've got on the screen here.
The wording is a little bit different, and the one thing that isn't in the variance permit itself is the sidewalk piece. So that would need to be added to the permit if council supports removing that from the requirement. So that could be an addition to the variances for the subdivision servicing bylaw.
Okay, so what you're saying is in the documents that have been provided, it does indicate the property line setback variances, the exemption for the frontage requirement, the variance to not require undergrounding of services.
Okay.
It has the 1-meter setback reduction for the floodplain exemption on that one lot.
Yes.
And then we would just need to add in the sidewalk if that's what we chose to do, to remove the sidewalk. Okay. All right. Any questions by council? Councillor Toth.
Sure, but just before we do that, can you unshare the screen so
Sure.
I can get my stuff back? Thank you. Great. First question, is there an elevation difference between a 1-meter setback and no setback relaxation at all? The reason I ask this question is to do with erosion, sea level rise, climate change, things of that nature. It may be that other properties in the area have, got gazebos and lawns down to the water's edge that predate these requirements. But with sea level rise, they're going to have to pay the price for those decisions from the past. I just wonder if there's an elevation difference between 0 meters and 1-meter change.
I believe there would be an elevation difference off the top of my head. I'm not sure how substantial, but there certainly would be. Perhaps not much of one though. Looking at the subdivision plan and the basic contours there likely would be a slight elevation change, but
okay,
I'd say not significant.
Thank you. I've got more if anybody else.
I just want to follow up to what you just said. At the edge of this property by the water, is there not a steep bank down there?
Yes.
So that there might be an actual setback, a difference in the grade because of the setback, but it's at the end of this property that it's actually pretty steep down to the ocean.
Yeah, the property does slope up in several waves. It's not the right below or right at the beach. There is a steeper drop off, and then it slopes up, and there's a few benches going upwards.
Right. So I guess what I'm getting at there, if it's 1 meter or 0 meters sea level rise to actually get to this property, where that would make that big a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 1 meter would be reasonable to sort of facilitate a better building area without unduly putting the building area at a higher risk of flood area. I think if we go closer than that, then we get into that area. And I think in general, staff are looking to try to keep to the 15-meter setback. And I think this will be a larger policy discussion moving forward, looking at the zoning bylaw and the OCP around these kinds of setbacks and what are we really trying to accomplish here in terms of addressing climate change and sea level rise. But for this particular site and this particular application, we're sort of left with staff not supporting the full 5 meters, but I think the 1 meter facilitates the subdivision without unduly putting the building area at risk.
Okay. Councillor Todd, continue.
Okay. Yeah, I have a really hard time supporting any exemption to the encroachment on that. And I've seen an older home's driveway leading right up to the edge of the cliff face where the house fell into the water. So I'm not in favor of any encroachment on those kind of setbacks. Looking on page 10 of our agenda, the zoning bylaw, looking at 5051C, the side yard setbacks being reduced to 1.5 meters. That's only 10 feet between buildings, potentially. Has the fire department had any comment on that?
Not on this specifically, but I mean, a lot of our residential zones have a 1.5 meter setback on at least one side, if not both sides. And it is something, I think there have been variances in the past that the district has considered, that reduction from the 3 meters down to the 1.5. And as I mentioned too, I mean, under the new zoning bylaw, we have had discussions around, the residential zones and simply going to 1.5 meters on both sides. I think the fire department and certainly that being the building code would have issues if you're going closer than that, but it would allow at least a 3 meter separation between buildings on either side of a property line.
Okay, and one more if I may.
Mhm.
How long is the previously approved DP and PLR letter valid for? I know you mentioned that they need to be updated. Just wondering how long they're valid for at this time.
The development permit, I believe it will lapse this December. And the PLR, I think it was issued more recently, so that lasts a little bit longer, but we would look at, as part of updating both documents with the most current subdivision layout, look at simply extending the timeline to the full, again, so for a revised PLR, issuing it for the full 18 months from whatever date of issuance. And then for the DP, once it's issued as revised, we would have the default 2-year period within which to start substantial construction.
Okay. Any other questions by council? Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, I just wondering what the beach, if you go down the beach access, if they develop the beach access, when you get to the beach, what's down there? Is there a 15-foot drop to the beach? And then is it a mud beach? Is it something that people are actually going to use?
Yeah, no, it is a reasonable beach. Like it is there are other beach accesses in the area. Both are I think wider, they're more undeveloped vehicle beach accesses, but certainly providing part of the legislation around public access to water is to ensure regular access along the water at specified distances. So what we're looking at here is recognition that, okay, the full 20 meters would basically prevent a 3-lot subdivision entirely. So in the goal of working with the applicant to try to help realize a 3-lot subdivision, we could accept that a pedestrian only access would be suitable, and that doesn't necessarily require the full 20 meters. And it is, a reasonable beach area, definitely something that I think the public would want to have access to. And looking at a low impact trail to provide access.
Perfect. So I'm just wondering, there's a picture here of Marine Way here with a car, and it's the property. So the subdivision, the property across the road has been completely subdivided, and it will never be. There's no more subdivision to be done there, so we won't be getting any more amenities from that side of the street. And so the properties on the same side of the street, it's I mean, when I'm driving by there, it looks like it looks like there's a bunch of individual lots that probably will not be subdivided. I mean, who knows, but I'm just kind of wondering, you know, what, so are we looking at putting a parking lane in and a sidewalk? Because this page 14, where it's got actually it's page 31, but it says it's got a 14 written on the bottom of it. Right by the back of the car there, that looks like there's a manhole there, probably sewer. And I'm just kind of wondering, you know, so are we looking at a road widening for parking and a sidewalk, or just a sidewalk along the road that's there?
Road widening is necessary to stabilize and secure a proper road width for the existing vehicle lanes. I don't believe it would involve a parking lane. It's really just to widen it to ensure sufficient width for the travel lanes. And then the sidewalk would be potentially part of that or not. But the road, I mean, regardless, the road right of way would have to be widened and the road pavement extended to bring the travel lane widths up to standard. And if there was no sidewalk, then it would just be extra space for pedestrians to walk down the side of the road.
Anything further, Councillor Lamb, on that?
No, I'm good. Great.
Okay. I have a question for you. When Mr. Polly was actually presenting, he talked about, he said it's undergrounded already. What was he referring to? Because I see that the poles that are standing there, that it looks like they're not undergrounded. Is he talking about it is underground on the road but wouldn't be in his property? I think we're looking at not having it undergrounded anywhere. Is that correct? That's the recommendation?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what he was referring to. I mean, the recommendation would be that the default requirement is that all along the property frontage being subdivided, all the hydro and telecommunication services would have to be undergrounded. So you wouldn't have the power poles carrying on right across like you would in a rural area. So the variance would say, okay, no, you can leave it up as overhead wires. It would be obviously the connection to the property itself goes underground, but the overhead wires would remain if council supported the variance request.
Okay. Councillor Toth, you had a question?
Yeah, actually, just to follow up to that one, is there any undergrounding of conduits that was previously done along Marine Way, either by subdivisions to the south or that subdivision to the north? This wasn't my original question that I put my hand up for, but Mayor Seegers made me think of it. So ask that first.
I'm not sure, that would be a better question for engineering answer. I think probably as part of the more recent RTC Marine Way, there may have been a requirement to underground services down there, but a lot of the properties in the existing immediate vicinity of this property haven't been developed recently. So there have been no recent subdivisions that would have had this as a requirement.
Okay, I just wonder if most of the conduit is there already, and this is just the last missing link, or if we've got.
Yeah, I don't anticipate that it is.
Okay. The waterfront, we have a sewer line that runs across the waterfront. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would these properties be connecting into it? This was a question raised in one of the letters we received. Would they be accessing sewer along that waterfront pipeline, or would they be accessing sewer along Marine Way?
I don't think a final decision has been made there. That's something we would deal with as part of the detailed servicing for the subdivision application. I think there have been discussions in the past that they would direct it to connect to Marine Way rather than down to the water, because that would involve additional encroachments and permissions. It would be easier to direct it back up to Marine Way.
And that that brings me to my last question, which is we have an encroachment setback we're looking at here. Does that provide any protection of trees within that area? I recognize they'll probably want to do some limbing or trimming to get some views through the trees. But do we have protections to make sure that they're not cut down anyways?
Yeah, certainly through, I mean, the whole property is affected by development permit areas. So before any land alteration can take place, you know, the development permit must be issued. Now, granted, one was issued earlier, but you know, as part of updating that permit area with the current subdivision plan, that would be one of those pieces we'd be looking at to address to ensure that the land does not get clear cut.
Okay, while others are thinking of other questions, I have one other one. Councillor Lamb talked about across the road and development, and basically saying that's all developed on that side. On the side that this property is on, my understanding that this is the last developable lot besides the RTC property on this side, and there aren't sidewalks anywhere up and down this street. Is that correct? Or is there more development to be happening?
The sidewalk, I think, goes as far as the marina, but no further at this time. Or just past the RTC Marine Way property up towards the marina.
Right. So what I guess what I'm saying, yeah, from this property down, it's pretty much all developed.
Yes.
Yes. So if we'd put a sidewalk in here, we basically have a sidewalk in the middle of no sidewalks for a very long time. Kind of like we have that one in Davis Bay.
Yeah, and this is definitely something for council to consider. I mean, this, you know, the district is working on looking at these kinds of situations, and is there something on the capital works project in the next 5 years that says, yep, we will be bringing sidewalks to this area, therefore we should secure this now as an incremental approach? Or if that's not the case, then looking at is then construction of this premature? Should we be taking cash in lieu if we've still got the project in mind within a reasonable time frame? Or if that's not the case either, then there would be a rationale to say, no, let's not require this at all at this time. If we want to have a sidewalk later, that would be a district project to look at for the future, for the whole length of Marine Way.
I don't recall seeing anything on any of our capital plans for any sidewalks along this area.
No.
No, okay. All right, any further questions? Councillor Toth?
Why not? The road allowance that's there right now, I mean, we've got narrow driving lanes and we've got people using the side of the road for parking, whether or not they should or shouldn't be. If we do go through here with sidewalks somewhere down the road, there will be no room for parking. Is that correct?
That's potentially.
Okay, and I know that the rest of that neighborhood is already fairly tight for parking, so I think it's safe to say there's probably going to be a low appetite for sidewalks in that neighborhood anytime soon. So thank you.
All right, any further questions? Okay, no further questions. There are 2 recommendations, and since those recommendations have come forward, staff are also bringing up the removal of the sidewalk. So the first one, the development variance permit would include the setbacks, the variance for the frontage, the variance for the undergrounding. We would need to add the removal of the sidewalk into that if that's the way council would like to go. It kind of sounds like it. And then the next one would be the recommendation for a flood control requirement exemption of 1 meter for the proposed lot 3. Councillor Toth.
I will move recommendation 2 with the addition of removing the sidewalks from requirement.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Any further comments on that one? All those in favor? Thank you. And the last one, recommendation 3, flood control requirement exemption. So staff are indicating they would support a 1 meter exemption, but not the 5 meters as requested. Someone like to make that recommendation or another recommendation? Councillor Lamb, you look like you'll do something.
Well, you know, the most important thing is we start getting to be consistent as we move forward. And so, you know, I'll support the 1 meter setback. Or not a 1 meter setback, but removing it to 14 meters. Yeah. And yeah, I guess we should have, I guess the,
So you'll make the recommendation as presented in item number 3, reducing the setback from 15 meters to 14 meters. Okay.
yes. Yep.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any further comments, questions? All those in favor? Any opposed? And would you like that recorded? Okay, so 2 opposed and 4 in favor. Thank you. So it's Councillor Rowe and Councillor Toth recorded. Yeah, thank you. All right, next item, item 10.2. Request for consideration for the deferral of the tax sale. First a motion, oh, and you know what, let's bring, oh, Councillor McLean, look at that, he appeared. So motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And Mr. Curry.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. My report today brings forward the option for Council to consider deferring the annual property tax sale. The Minister of Public Safety provided a COVID-19 order back in May related to the financial measures and the impact of emergency from COVID on for the financial impact for this particular order. The order includes that Council may defer the tax sale by 1 year. Some reasons that were highlighted in my report that Council may consider the deferral of the tax sale. In a difficult year for many, the deferral could alleviate the stress of paying the delinquent taxes for 1 year for property owners which have been impacted by COVID-19 from loss of employment or income. And also property owners with reduced income due to COVID-19 may have limited options to pay for delinquent taxes. So this would be something to alleviate the burden of having to worry about the stress of your home going up for sale in the tax sale come September. A few reasons on the other side that Council may consider keeping the tax sale date for September 2020 is that we'd be faced at collecting 4 years of taxes next year if we delayed the tax sale by a year. The larger balance in taxes in 2021 could be more difficult for property owners to clear. So this would mean that the delinquent taxes next year would equal 2 years worth. So in the case where you had to come up with $3,000 to redeem your property in this September, next year you'd be looking at approximately $6,000. So just more challenging to come up with the $6,000 to redeem your property for a year versus the smaller amount. And another reason why the Council may consider leaving it at this date is that we've not have a tax sale at the district since 2012. We do everything we can to collect the 3rd year of taxes right starting now. And usually this list of approximately 50 properties gets down to 0 by the time the tax sale date comes along. So we have a pretty good record of actually not having a tax sale. And the last thing, the total properties with delinquent taxes is actually down this year compared to the last 3 years. So that'd be another reason to keep the tax sale as it is. So at this time, we do not recommend that Council considers the deferral of the tax sale. And we would like to continue our efforts to collect the delinquent taxes with the hopes of not having the sale for another year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Toth.
Do we know I know it says in the report there were 55 properties at the time this report was put together. Do we know what number we're at right now?
I don't offhand. No, I will know. And this evening, I'm going to run an updated report on taxes collected, but I don't know at the moment.
Okay. I know that there has been advocacy previously during these, I hate to use the term, but unprecedented times, asking for the province to expand its deferral criteria. So far, no changes on that front, and expected to be no changes on that front. The fact that we haven't had a tax sale since 2012 is awesome on the part of our staff. It's a hassle to do, and it's a bit of an embarrassment to homeowners and things of that nature. So good job to staff. In order for a property to go to tax sale, it needs to be behind on 3 years worth of taxes, correct?
Mr. Curry? Oh, looks like he's frozen.
Yes, 3 years.
Okay, so
Thank
if a home is headed for tax sale and they pay up the delinquent taxes that 3rd year back, they're taken off the tax sale. They don't have to come up to current?
Correct.
Okay.
Once it goes through tax sale, though, they have to pay it all.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Councillor Toth, you froze on my screen.
And you
That's
froze
okay,
on
I think you
ours.
answered my question. You're the one that froze, Ben.
Okay.
Okay, so this isn't really so much a 2020 problem as it is a 2021 or 2022 problem, because we're we don't know people's circumstances, and we don't know where they're going to be by September or even next year. I'd like to actually move option 2. I think it's the humanitarian thing to do, and yes, it could result in people owing more by next year, but it could also give them that year to get that delinquent tax caught up, or find, beg, borrow the money to do so. So I'd like to move option 2.
So that would be that council requests staff to prepare a report and bylaw to defer the tax sale for 2020. Thank you. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. All right. Speaking to the motion, Councillor McLean.
Thank you. So we've been granted the ability to defer the tax sale for this year. Is there any prospect of deferring it for future years? Because I think people are going to face a crunch this year, and we may not see that coming to a tax sale for 3 years.
That would be, at this time, there hasn't been any mention of deferring the following year, but that would be up to the province if another order was came from the minister. So at this time, it's unknown if they would defer it another year, but I'm sure in all likelihood, if people continued reduced incomes and the burden stayed the same as it is, then I'm sure that the consideration could be made, but it's hard to say.
Okay, I'm just going to make a comment. It's Ms. North who's been doing all of the work on this. It's a mission for her. She's taken this on for the last number of years, done an amazing job. I guess my question to you around this, given that we're actually removing the incentive potentially for people to bring their taxes current, at least for that 1 year, right? Pay that. What will she see the impact on her efforts to actually get people to pay that 3rd year? Do you think that'll have an impact?
I think we would still continue our process of issuing the letters for the reminders. And the date would be a little further out, but we wouldn't change our process on our end. So we'd continue, although the tax sale wouldn't be held, and the dates for the, if you don't pay your 3rd year of taxes, the tax sale will be on so-and-so date, would just be pushed a further year, but we'd continue our efforts. And in the same, we'd still work with the bank. So typically we notify the any charges on title if a property's heading into tax sale, and that's usually the key to getting the amount paid before the date. So we'd continue that process so that the banks are still given an opportunity to potentially pay the 3rd year of taxes this year instead of waiting and doing it all next year.
Okay. Any further questions? Councillor McLean?
I was wondering if staff could speak to any typical reasons that people have when they get up to these 3 years for not paying their taxes for 3 years. Do you have any indication of that?
I think it's just priorities on where you're on your finances and what there's no real particular reason, and circumstances are always vary. So there's all different circumstances as to why someone may not pay their taxes.
Okay, that's fair.
I'll give you one example that I know of, I think from a couple of years ago. If a homeowner actually defers their taxes, but then forgets to, or in one case, this one lady was sick and did not do her form for tax deferral, then those taxes come due. And that triggered it in her case. Councillor Toth.
Yeah, I'm happy to share this actually. I inherited the house I'm living in 2012, and I was in a bit of a tough financial situation living in the city at the time. And when you're not living in the house, you can't claim the homeowner's grant. And so my tax bill was substantially larger than it is now that I'm living in it. And so I went 2 years not being able to pay my taxes, and it was just a priority in life situation. You know, when I did move up here and move back into the house in 2014, I could claim the homeowner's grant, and I could pay the current year's taxes, and I could start chipping away at those taxes that were outstanding. So it's obviously usually financial related. People on lower incomes tend to have problems, but it can also be people that face sudden and unexpected hardships that maybe just snowball depending on their debt load.
All right, any other questions or comments? Councillor Lamb.
Is there a percentage of commercial, industrial as related to residential of what would be in deferral?
Are you meaning in the deferral of this amount that's deferred for the delinquent taxes, or deferred when you defer your taxes? Because
yeah, I was just wondering if, you know, if there's 30 units that have not paid their taxes, is it mostly in industrial or commercial, or is it mostly residential?
I don't have the particular stat. I could easily get it and report back. Yeah, we could provide that as far as what the percentage is. There is one particular property of our total outstanding, which include it's $54,000 to one commercial property. So that does happen. Yeah, when there could be a percentage of almost half and half.
Yeah. I'm just, for me, I'm just kind of wondering, you know, is it if there's 5 residential people that are, you know, struggling or you know, that are deferring their taxes, and there's, you know, 8 commercial guys, then I'm going, let's just go for it, you know, let's not defer the taxes. But if it's you know, if it's a lot of residential people, then let's slow it down a bit here.
All right, seeing no more questions, there's a recommendation on the floor that we request staff prepare a report and bylaw to defer the tax sale for 2020. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. Next item, 10.3, Sechelt Downtown Business Association. Sorry, go ahead,
Just
Councillor
real
Todd.
quick question for Ben before he totally disappears on us. Do we know a timing for that coming back to us?
It'll be one of the upcoming meetings, so that we have potentially 2 meetings before the deadline. So it could be the first meeting in July or the first in August if there was a second meeting following.
Thank you. All right, item 10.3, motion to receive the report. This is for Sechelt Downtown Business Association iced tea application, Downtown Sechelt on-street patio program. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And who's speaking to this one? Anybody? Mr. Curry.
Joanne was planning to speak to this one. I'm just waiting to see if she comes online, and then I can jump in if needed.
Okay, she is here. Yeah, there
Okay.
she is.
There she is.
Sorry, thank you. Somehow I got booted out there for a minute. Yes, I can speak briefly to this. Council will recall that they directed staff, or that you considered an proposed iced tea application from SDBA at your last meeting, and you directed that staff contact SDBA and come up with details on what their plans are, and then to bring forward a report to you on where the funding could come from for our matching funds, and just to provide you with other information about the proposal. So my report is there in front of you, and if you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. Thank you.
All right, any questions? So I know when this report came before us, previously, we requested it go to staff, and we had a number of questions, and staff have addressed those questions in the report. Anything further?
I should say it's not my report. It's a joint effort with myself and the manager of financial services. So if you have any financial questions, Ben would be happy to answer those.
Okay, Councillor McLean.
All right, so I understand that a decision on location would be done later. However, I feel like that is a pretty critical piece of information. So in the proposal that we received at our last meeting, there was one essentially beside the Rainbow Crosswalk. Do we have any indication of why we need a second one? Because that location makes sense to me. I don't know about a second location because I have no idea where it would be.
I can say at this point, I don't, but the mayor, I think, may have had some discussions with SDBA around that, maybe?
They were saying that they wanted to consider potentially across from each other so that both sides of the street could actually have access to the patios, but it's not fixed at this point. I think what we're looking at is the funding is available for the second one at this point. And the free labor is available. So if we can pull it together to do two, then they can move the other location around should they choose. Any further questions? Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because when we saw the letter previously, it was one, and now it's
Yes.
two patios. So just wondering when that evolved, or was it intended to be two all along and we just had bad information the first time?
No, it was one initially. And then when we started looking at what was available from ICE-T will fund up to 15,000 per application. So then we had a conversation with the SDBA to say if we're looking at doing one and the funding is available, would there be an appetite for two? And they said yes.
Okay. Financial question, just to warn Ben. The council contingency operating account, I read in the report it's set at $10,000 and is for items that come up throughout the year. Have we spent anything from it so far this year?
No, not to my knowledge, unless there was any resolution at an in-camera meeting that hasn't come through, but not to my knowledge or to the record of the GL.
No, we have not.
Okay, because this, fairly substantial chunk of $10,000 being looked at here with one request.
Yeah.
I'm happy to support it. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't overly depleting that account early.
Okay, I've got Councillor McLean, Councillor Rowe, Councillor Lamb.
Great. Do we have an expected time frame for this project? And similar question, what happens if we don't get the grant? Does it move forward?
I think turnaround time is what? Very quick. It's within a couple of weeks. They recognize this program was set up to deal with COVID related projects. That's why it's 15,000, very quick turnaround. When it goes in and it'll be when the applications come in until the money's used up, they just keep, entertaining applications. Once the money's used up, then they're done. Okay. Councillor Rowe, and then Councillor Lamb.
Just the council contingency fund, that's where our travel expenses usually come out of when we go to conferences, et cetera. Is that right? Or is that different?
Mr. Douglas?
Council's budgeted for travel in their travel and conference budget.
Okay.
Whenever we need extra, let's say an extra conference came up, yes, we can go in there and utilize some of those funds with the council motion. And I believe
I feel like we probably aren't going to use much of our conference budget in 2020. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Lamb, and then Councillor Toth.
Do we have an idea of the size of these patios or what they're going to look like?
At this point, we don't know exact size. We do know that they're going to be they're going to be wooden, and they're going to be made in 3 or 4 sections so that they're easily taken down and stored away. But the idea was that, or the idea in talking to SDBA was, as soon as they know that their grant has been approved, those details will be sorted out very quickly, and we can bring that information forward to staff, to council at that time.
All right. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I'm just, yeah. I'm just kind of wondering where we put them. Are you going to block off Cowrie Street? And I mean, if these things are 30 feet long and 30 feet wide, or are they 10 feet? You don't build much for $4,000 even with free labor anymore.
No, the indication that they gave us initially and the pictures with the initial application talked about using 1 car stall. So one slot for a car, and so it wouldn't be big. Yeah.
By 20.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Toth, I think you had your hand up. Did you? And then Councillor McLean.
I did. I was going to move recommendation 2 that the SDBA application for an Island Coastal Economic Trust grant to assist with installation of 2 freestanding on-street patios be endorsed, and recommendation 3 that $4,000 in matched funds for the SDBA's application to ICE-T grant for an on-street patio be allocated from the council contingency operating account.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Okay. And Councillor McLean, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it was just one more question that I wanted to sneak in, so I'm just going to do it anyways. Under COVID, most restaurants are cleaning the tables regularly. What will we do for these?
We did speak about that somewhat, with the idea being that that the SDBA would keep an eye on the patios when they're in use, and that between the various business owners and SDBA members, that it was felt that that wouldn't be a problem, that they would be able to disinfect them and kind of maintain them throughout the use. We did discuss that, and they're aware that would have to be done.
All right, any other comments, questions? All those in favor? All right, thank you very much. So if we move on to item number, let's see, 13. Any emergency items from staff?
No, Your Worship, nothing that I'm aware of.
Thank you. So item number 14 is a motion to move into closed session. So that the meeting be closed to the public as a subject matter relates to the following sections of section 91 and 92 of the community charter. So 91K and L and 92B. Someone like to make that motion? Move, seconded. All in favor? Thank you.